So, hello and welcome. My name's Steve Nobel, and today I'm speaking with Carrie LaDue on the Divinely Guided Leader. Carrie has a doctorate in organizational development and has had senior leadership positions in some of the largest non-profits in the US. She has lots of clients across the nation and in more than 30 states, actually. She's coached executives in multiple industries, and she is a certified life coach, health coach, yoga teacher, and her website is www.carrieladue.com. There will be a link going out with this podcast. Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great speaking with you. It's a great topic. It's one that's close to my heart, actually, because there's lots of examples of bad leadership in the world. I don't want to name names, but there's tyrants, there's the ego-driven people, there's the people in the ivory towers, which I've come across quite a few of those. There's the not paying attention, not really listening types. You're going to do it my way or the highway. Have you come across bad leadership?
Unfortunately, yes, I have.
What's it like?
I think one of the things I've come to understand about bad leadership is the root cause of it. Because I'm always curious in terms of where are these behaviors coming from, right? Behaviors are symptoms, I would say, of our beliefs. And what I believe happens when you have a really bad leader is that deep down inside there are some wounds there, whether they're from childhood traumas or whatever. People have these stories that they've told themselves, and there's a lot of, I need to prove myself to the world kind of behaviors that are exemplified. And where does that come from? Well, that comes from, that's ego-driven, and that comes from lack of self-worth and lack of self-confidence and those kinds of things. And that seems to me to be the common pattern across all the bad leaders that I've certainly encountered, is the same root cause, which in some ways I think is, a good thing to understand and to know, because we know the wounds can be healed. If people want to do that work, there is a way for them to overcome those kinds of things.
I know when I stepped into leadership, I remember at the time, most of the examples of leadership I'd had was authoritarian, the old model. Mm-hmm. And so initially that was the kind of model that I adopted, really, and then realized it's not working. Quick, I've got to go and find another one quickly. Do you find that people inherit bad models of leadership? We've got popes kind of over the kind of whole church. We've got generals over the whole military. This kind of chain of command type of leadership. Is that model being challenged now?
I believe so. I think what people are learning is that it's ineffective, right? And so people realize when they're not getting the results that they want with a certain type of leadership, and if they're really committed to their desired outcomes, something needs to change. So I do see a lot of people and a lot of professional learning and development and training for people in positions of leadership that have a different paradigm that is being implemented in terms of their own leadership growth.
Yeah. Now, well, leadership, people might think, or I might think of politicians or generals or things like that, but really leadership is called for in many spheres of life, I believe, like community building, business, social enterprise, as well as the political, financial, and so on. Would you say that we really are in need of great leadership generally?
Absolutely, and I don't view leadership as being tied to position. I don't think it's about title. I don't think it's about position. I think it's about, are you able to influence others to move towards something that is making the world a better place? Can you help other people move towards something in which we're contributing in a way that's meaningful and making a difference? And so leadership can be on a very small scale, it can be on a large scale, but it's really about, do you inspire other people to sort of step into a particular role and to move forward with things? And the other piece about it, I think, is, and do you help people to grow, right? I think that is one of the number one sort of obligations, responsibilities as a leader, is your job is to help grow other people and help them to evolve and step into sort of their highest potential. And that can look all kinds of different ways.
What are the qualities of a great leader, would you say?
So I ask this question. I mean, I certainly have my own personal opinions, but I also have asked this question to almost every single leader I've ever coached or worked with to try to understand what they value. And the kinds of things that always come up, well, somebody that really believes in me, they had this unwavering belief that I was going to do something amazing. That made all the difference. their ability to have a really inspiring and clear vision. They got us all behind sort of this common vision, which helped us to move forward together as a team. They cared more about the people that they lead than themselves. They are, right in the work with us. There's never a sense of, well, the on the ground work is for you to do, I'm too good for it. Really strong leaders are willing to roll up their sleeves and get gritty and sort of do the hard work themselves. Of course, competence plays a huge role. For leaders to be really respected and influenced, yes. You need to have the knowledge and skill set, in the field that you're working, or you don't have the credibility with the people that you want to lead. So that's really important. So those are some of the things that I've heard, are really common in terms of what has inspired leaders that have inspired others to move forward and do really important work.
When it comes to divinely guided, because this is a whole new concept, isn't it, in a way that you can have great competent leaders, inspiring leaders who are clear with their vision, rolling up the sleeves. Divinely guided sounds like they're being driven by something else as well as.
Yes, yeah. So some of the newer work that I've been doing with leaders around this, a lot of it has to do with helping leaders get out of their head. So leaders they're really intellectual, they're usually very intelligent and smart, and they're often really analytical. So they've spent most of their career up in their head problem solving, which I think is connected to this in some way, because I think it's kind of been the false god of leadership, that our job as leaders is to solve all of the problems that our people bring to us, right?
Yeah.
And so this pattern of being up in their head, what it's done has really sort of cut that cord and severed that tie to higher power. And so they're thinking all the time, and they're not really moving forward from their heart. And what we know is that when you can quiet the mind and you can slow down or stop those analytical processes for a little while and just ask from that heart space, from that heart center, what's the right move here? What's the move that's going to best support people and have the best outcome? When you can ask from that space, and you can quiet the ego and the mind, you'll get an answer. And that answer is never going to steer you wrong. So it's not about not using data. I have to often give this disclaimer, when I'm helping organizations to create strategy, we use data to inform the work. That's incredibly important. But I'm talking about the change management piece that is about people and how the people are going to respond to the changes. We can't overthink that stuff. From that place, it's where we really need to be guided by our higher power, and from that heart center. And the results are better when you move forward from that place.
I can resonate with that because I was in a leadership position in a corporate company where I was being asked to problem solve all the time, and what I realized was that by being a problem solver, it kind of generated more problems in a way that the people going, oh, it's great, let's present more. And I found that rather than solving them, it just seemed to generate more, like mushrooms were kind of mushrooming all over the place. And in terms of getting clear and leading from the heart, because I moved out of London about a year ago, and I'm living on the coast, which is very quiet by the sea, and I'm finding the stillness and space has given me so much more creativity. And of course, in today's world, creativity often translates into projects, into money, at the very base level. You could say money, can't you? So I'm finding that stillness, and I guess people in the corporate world would think that you always got to be on the go, no time to stop, no time for stillness. This is a luxury. Do you find people resist this idea?
I think they do, and what they're not understanding is that they're missing out on the source of really tapping potential and innovation and all the things that they seek to achieve. They come from a different source and from a different place, right? They come from the source of creativity. They come from the heart center. They come from divine guidance. And when we're leading from that place, you enter this state of flow. And then things feel so much easier. You don't feel like you're always trying to swim upstream. Yeah. So I think part of our job right now with leaders is to help them understand that yes, this is a different way of operating, but once you've had a taste of it, once you sort of just trust a little bit to give it a try, you go, oh my gosh, I feel so much better at the end of the day. I'm not exhausted. I still have energy left. I'm having these ideas and these things that are going to make a difference and make an impact. And that's where we need leaders actually to be in that place right now, because you take a look at the world around us, and we need people that are willing to step up in pretty big ways.
Yeah.
And I don't think that requires people sacrificing happiness and joy and just wellness, right? Like that sense of chronic stress and burnout that a lot of leaders have associated with leadership. The higher up you go, the more stress you're going to have. That's not the truth of the matter. That's a really old damaging story that we have that sort of exists in society that I think we have to shift and change.
Yeah. Well, some years ago, I think back in the 90s, I came across a book called The Corporate Mystic. And this book explored, I think they went they explored 100 CEOs from respected companies, and they found some of the best performing CEOs heavily relied on this. You touched on it before, intuition, right brain, but they wouldn't call it intuition. They would call it gut instinct and things like this. And I remember I met someone about 15, 20 years ago who was an investment banker, and she told me she used to have lots of dreams about investments, and her colleagues would laugh at her dreams until they realized that actually her dreams were quite accurate in terms of investment. She used to have her dreams about investing, and then they stopped laughing and they started taking notice. I mean, she's not in that world anymore. She left and she opened a retreat center, and I think she's now gone back to America. But I just thought it's interesting that the complete resistance she would have. I can understand it, having been in the corporate world. But intuition seems like a completely another sphere, doesn't it? People can talk about heart and gut, but when you start talking about intuition, it sounds like there's angels whispering in your ear, and they don't kind of like that so much. Do you find that people resist that?
I think intuition is becoming now more acceptable in terms of, the professional fields and leadership. I think divine guidance is probably sort of the one that is still like, okay, there's a select few for whom they're like, yes, I'm there, I get that. And to me, you can call it whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I think what it's about is understanding that you've got to quiet the ego, you've got to quiet the mind, you have to come to stillness, and that those answers, those ideas, they exist within you, right? They're there for you to tap into. Yeah. So your belief system, I think, matters less. The words you use matter less. I think it's about the practice and the process, and then also this trusting yourself, that sort of in this deeper place, in this deeper source, is where those answers live and reside. You just have to tap into it.
Yeah, it's almost like, it sounds like, certainly was my case, I had to overcome my education up to that point. When I stepped into leadership, all of it was left brain, analytical, bullet points, business plan. I remember when I was a director of this company, and I was asked at a board meeting, what's my business plan for the next 5 years? I just said, well, I just feel the world is so volatile. I don't want to create a business plan, but having an idea of where I want to take the company was one thing. But it seemed like the markets were so volatile and changeable that fixing something to something, it seemed to be a mistake. And actually that company's still doing very, very well. So what would you say about, on the one hand, there's intuition or feeling the way forward, and then the other hand, I've got to have a business plan. Is there a way to balance the two?
There is. I think there's a happy medium, and I think what you're mentioning is sort of what I've found is a misperception. It's driven by perfectionism in a lot of ways, right? The business and the strategic planning process, and a false belief that if I map this all out in black and white and I make this concrete, I can sort of delegate and give marching orders to everybody in the org, and it's like a surefire way that nothing's going to go wrong and we're going to hit our targets, right? Yeah. And it's driven from this place of wanting, it's like a control thing, a perfectionism kind of thing, and none of those, when we're driven by those things, those don't serve us, right? Our energy it's not the right energy to really move us forward. So what you talked about in terms of having vision, right? Like knowing where you're headed is critical, and because people can't follow you somewhere if they don't know where you're going. And so getting crystal clear on that is really key. Now, there is a strategy component to that because people also need to know what's the role that I'm going to play in this work and how am I going to know that I'm successful in this work. So there has to be strategy, but your strategy has to be flexible so that as you get new information, you can adapt, and adjust course. And so, like I always say to my clients, reserve the right to get smarter. We're going to map this out and we're going to monitor our progress, but we're also going to shift and move as, we get new information. And the companies that have that kind of approach to strategy, not only do they still hit their targets and sometimes overshoot their targets, but people feel better about the work. They don't feel bogged down by this darn plan that on paper when they're feeling like my intuition is saying, my gut is saying, I should go this other direction, but on paper, we've got to go here, right? That's stifling, and it doesn't allow us to use our creativity, which is the number one most important thing for leaders to be using.
Yeah. Now, this may sound an odd question. I'm not sure if it comes in the remit of what you do with clients, but one of the things I've found in my work, and I'm probably getting more out there than most, I suppose, is that dreaming as in sleeping on stuff and waking up with either it could be a challenge and then in the morning you go, I just know the answer, or it could be a new project that often in my dreams I'm told often do this, and sometimes I sit with it for hours going through the dream and I wake up going, I know what I've got to do today. Is that common, or do you find that happens with clients?
I wish it happened more. I think it's something that we try to cultivate, but what you're talking about is you're giving yourself permission to process, right? And so for a process to occur that's going to lead to insight. And one of the things that leaders tend to struggle with is a belief that they should have all the answers and have them right away.
Yeah.
So I see them struggle to stay in the moment in what feels to them like a high stakes meeting or situation. I'm not sure about that right now. Let me think about that. Let's come back to that. And what I want to say to the leaders out there is, give yourself and the people you work with permission to pause, because whether it's a couple hours or whether it's overnight, again, the answers already lie within you. You've just got to give yourself the space and the opportunity to tap into them. And we often can't do that. It's very few people that can do that in the moment. And if you think you're doing it in the moment, it's probably coming from a different place, right? It's probably coming from your analytical mind and from ego, and not from sort of your source of inspiration and creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's another thing I read on your website about linking authenticity, influence, and vulnerability. And it's an interesting one because it seemed to me in some of the companies I worked for that being myself was not allowed. I had to toe the company line. What does it mean to be authentic and vulnerable? Of course, didn't seem very well. That was quite a while ago. You weren't able to really open your heart and it wasn't the done thing. Certainly not in Britain. Is this changing?
I sure hope so. I mean, I think it's a newer conversation. I think it's something that, again, as leaders, we sort of have a responsibility to dig into and bring to the organizations that we work with. Vulnerability and authenticity are connected. You can't authentically be yourself if you don't feel like you can be vulnerable. And the thing about vulnerability is most people feel like, well, I can't feel vulnerable if I don't trust the people that I work with, my leader, my team, the culture here, whatever it is. And there's a misconception here, which is that trust comes before vulnerability. Well, it doesn't really work that way. You sort of have to trust to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable, you have to trust. And what we know from the research, and I love Brene Brown's work on this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but it's over 20 years of research on these topics, and it's really undeniable when you think about it from your own personal experience as well. But that, trust is built in small moments. It's not really these big, huge, grand gestures that people make towards each other. It's the small moments and how we're interacting with each other. So what that means for leaders is being fully present, deeply listening, believing in your people. All of those small, every interaction, you have the opportunity to build trust with your people or erode trust. And if you're building trust, they're going to start feeling like they can be vulnerable and therefore be their most authentic selves. Well, why is that important? Well, because when we don't feel like we can bring our whole self to work for who we truly are, and we have to put on this mask and hide who we are, number one, we're not your most engaged employee, right? We're just not, because we're not feeling. It's an energy drain on us, and we're going to always have this nagging feeling that maybe we should go somewhere else where we can really be ourselves. Like, that is our human nature. It's part of, we have to feel like we can just show up for who we are and not be judged for it negatively. So it's important that people can be authentic at work. And so I do think that the other piece I think around leadership is there's these like old school beliefs about, to be vulnerable is weakness, and just no evidence to say that that's the truth. In fact, being vulnerable requires great courage. And so when you're vulnerable as a leader, you're modeling that for the people that you serve. And I have a really strong belief that we need to model what we expect from others. Well, I as a leader want my people to feel courageous. So I'm going to have to model that through everything that I do. And one component of that is being vulnerable and truly being myself.
Well, one aspect of leadership that I'm probably quite familiar with is people who are in the personal development zone or even the spiritual zone, where they're standing on stage and inspiring and leading audiences, whatever their chosen area is. And I found that vulnerability connected to storytelling, telling personal stories about themselves, is hugely important. It builds huge trust. It may be different in the corporate world, but certainly in that zone, anybody wanting to be a leader in that zone, I think it's very important to do that. And I used to coach authors, and I found that so many of them made themselves absent. And I used to say, "Where are you in this story?" It's almost like you're preaching to some audience that needs converting, but people need to know how you've shifted in terms of your message. Do you find do you coach kind of people in that zone, personal development zone as well?
Absolutely. And sometimes we even have to spend a little time crafting their story, because it feels, if it's not something that they've been doing as leaders, it doesn't really feel natural, or they feel like nobody's interested in my story. And so the first step is like, let's overcome that misconception, because they are. It makes you human. It helps them relate to you, to know that you have challenges that you've overcome as well, right? So it's the belief that nobody cares we have to overcome. And then it's what story what's going to help people connect with you in a way that's really meaningful. And I also try to think about, like, the stories that I share. What are the stories for which, there might be an applicable lesson for them as well? How can this story serve them in their own growth and development? Because that's what we do when we're listening to stories, is we're making those personal connections. So stories are great because not only is it about building trust and engagement, but it's also a great teaching tool. And as leaders, again, that's another part of your job, is to teach others.
Yeah, I've heard some very inspiring speeches by people, authors. I think J.K. Rowling was one of them, who, rather than just talk about all their successes, were actually talking about all the areas they found most difficult and challenging, but they got through it somehow. And and people relate. I think she was a single parent on benefits or something. So anybody like that would be inspired by that story. And I remember I went through a bit of a dark night of the soul myself, and I, in that time, wanted to get away from the mind, body, spirit field. And I remember taking a job as a bus driver for a year and a bit, and then I came out of it and came back to this field. And I remember there was a girlfriend saying to me, "You have to share that story. It's so inspiring." And I just said, "There is no way under heaven and earth I'm going to stand up and say I drove a bus, for a year and a half." And I did actually do it, and I found the response was incredible. And I was still kind of staggered by how would people find that inspiring. And whenever I share it with people, they go, "That's just so inspiring, so amazing." And I still go, "Is that amazing? What's so amazing about that?" But I guess it does show a sense of vulnerability, that I've not always been some kind of high-flying leader in some spiritual world. I have done very, very ordinary jobs, and for some people, they found that incredibly inspiring. I'm still a bit confused about that, but so I totally get the thing about telling stories as helping people shift and inspiring them. So let me ask you finally, what about one of the areas I found even very successful people in all walks of life, including myself, struggle at times with, is time management and burnout because of that. There's too many things to do, not enough time, and if only I could clone myself, how wonderful it would be, but I can't, not yet anyway. So how have you come across this issue very much?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably one of the things that drive, people to me is I'm a bit of a burnout specialist, you might say, from my own personal history of overcoming it. And here's the thing about time management. It's so not about time management. I do help my clients in terms of getting clear about what they want to do over the next 90 days, and then how you set up your morning and evening routines to support you. Like, there are things around that you need to know to be successful and that are useful. So I won't deny that. And that's like the low-hanging fruit. That's easy to teach. It's easy for people to implement. But the thing that people need to ask themselves if they are working themselves into the ground is, what's the root cause? Right? So we think that this, like, oh, I'm going to work all the time, it's somebody else's fault. There's these external forces at play that require me to work all the time. No, that's not true. We're responsible for overworking if that's the thing that we're doing. And there's always a belief that lies underneath that. And so, I see that people, it's perfectionism, right? So they spend way more time on things that they need to because it's got to be, this picture perfect little package, versus what I like to think of as like minimum viable product, like do it, get it out there into the world. That's one thing. And then you got to ask, and leaders are often, perfectionists for sure. And they think that it's actually the thing that's like helped them rise to the level that they're at. But at a certain point, it stops serving us. So what's underneath perfectionism that's making you like do all this extra work that's unnecessary? Well, that's usually a lack of self-worth. I'm trying to prove something to myself or to somebody else. And so if it's not perfectionism, then there's still always this like proving to myself or to somebody else. And that's why I'm saying yes to all these projects that come my way. I don't know how to set and communicate a healthy boundary. And maybe I'm afraid to set that boundary because, oh my gosh, what will people think of me? They won't think I'm a team player. They won't think I'm good enough, right? So I don't know if you can hear sort of this pattern or the theme underneath all of these behaviors, but it always comes down to like healing these wounds and this inner game and believing that you are enough exactly how you are right now today, and you've got nothing to prove to anybody. And once you step into that realization, all the craziness, right? All of the working 80 hours a week and not having any boundaries, that stuff stops because you're done trying to prove something to yourself and to everybody else.
Now, I've given you a website, Carrie. What if people are attracted to work with you? What kind of work do you do with people?
Sure. Well, I work both with organizations and teams and individuals. So I do group coaching and organizational strategy, and then executive coaching. And I also just take, on one-on-one coaching clients. Perhaps it's not connected to their organization, but they need a little help in, moving out of a place of chronic stress and burnout into a healthier way of being. Or lots of times people come to work with me because they feel this impending transition or like a change needs to happen, and they don't exactly know what that is or how to move through that. And so we work on that together. And it's really simple. I've got a scheduling page on my website. People can go on there and just set up a call to talk with me at any time.
Very good. And I'll send a link out with this podcast. Carrie, amazing speaking with you.
Oh, you too, Steve. Thanks so much for the time. I look forward to connecting with you again.